I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
Lady Louise Windsor had been silent for less than a minute when Prince William realized the small envelope in her hand could change the emotional balance of the monarchy. It carried Prince Philip's private seal, William's name, and an instruction that had apparently survived untouched since the Duke's final days. Then Louise revealed why she had finally brought it forward. Philip had left one last personal message for the man destined to inherit the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise did not slide the envelope toward him. She kept one hand beside it, as if releasing it meant surrendering the final duty her grandfather had placed in her care. A royal archive, the official system used to preserve historically important papers, had never received this note. Philip had forbidden that. No courtier, secretary, historian, or monarch was to see it before William. William stared at the handwriting and felt the room tighten. He knew that hand. It belonged not to the public Duke remembered for ceremony, but to the grandfather who challenged him and never pretended responsibility would be painless. Louise watched his fingers reach toward the seal, then stop. Her private recorded account of the exchange preserved what she told him next. He said you would know when it was time. Louise had feared this moment for years. Philip trusted her because their bond was quiet, practical, and untouched by succession. She needed no powerful royal role to matter to him. William carried the opposite burden. As the future king, he was moving closer to decisions that could divide affection from duty, exactly the conflict his grandfather understood. That was why the envelope felt less like inheritance than a test. William finally broke the seal. The opening sentence offered no comfort. When duty becomes performance, the crown has already begun to lose. He read it once, then again. Louise saw his expression change and wondered whether she had chosen the right day. Delivering the message fulfilled Philip's command, yet it also surrendered the last secret that felt like it belonged only to her and the man she had lost. William kept reading, but the next passage stopped him cold. Philip referred to an old conversation with Louise, one she had never imagined mattered enough to enter his final message. Suddenly she was not merely carrying the envelope, she was part of the reason it had survived. But before William could understand what Philip was trying to protect, he had to understand why his grandfather trusted Louise with a secret meant for Britain's future king. Philip had spent a lifetime surrounded by ceremony, yet some of his most consequential judgments were made far away from microphones. Louise knew that private version of him. William knew another. One was the granddaughter who could sit beside him without needing anything from the Duke. The other was the grandson Philip believed would eventually face the monarchy's most unforgiving test. The sealed note connected those two relationships in a way neither had understood. Louise remembered a grandfather who preferred practical lessons to speeches. He talked with her plainly, encouraged her carriage driving, and treated mistakes as something to learn from rather than hide. The Duke of Edinburgh, the formal title given to Philip as the sovereign's husband, carried enormous public status, but with her he could simply be a demanding grandfather. That difference mattered, because she learned how he thought when ceremony was stripped away. William had never been given quite the same freedom. Philip loved him, but the affection carried weight. The future king had lived through childhood grief, public expectation, and the knowledge that one day constitutional responsibility, the duty to act within the monarchy's legal and national role, would sit directly on his shoulders. The Duke understood that pressure, and he prepared his grandson with a seriousness Louise had noticed long before she understood why. Louise once began criticizing herself during a private family lunch after making a driving mistake. Philip cut through the embarrassment immediately. "Failure matters only when you refuse to learn from it," he told her. William smiled from nearby, until his grandfather turned toward him and added, "That applies to institutions too." The smile disappeared. Louise remembered the silence because Philip did not explain himself. He expected William to understand. Louise now admitted that carrying the envelope had never felt like simple safekeeping. Every royal crisis made her wonder whether the moment had arrived. Philip's instruction had been precise. No death, accession, scandal, or anniversary would determine the timing. An accession, the moment a new monarch formally becomes sovereign, was specifically ruled out. She had to decide when preparation had become responsibility. William felt exposed by that confession. He asked why Philip had chosen her. Louise answered carefully. Her grandfather believed someone outside the direct line of succession might notice William's isolation before the palace itself did. Louise then revealed she had nearly delivered the note once before. She stopped because William still had people around him who could carry part of the burden. He understood immediately which period she meant. And that memory led back to one private family gathering, an evening Philip never forgot and Louise never expected to witness. The note did not begin with Philip's illness. It began earlier, during a private Windsor dinner that was supposed to be forgettable. No announcement was made. No scandal escaped the walls. Yet by the end of that evening, Philip had watched William surrender his own judgment simply to stop an argument around the table. Louise saw her grandfather's reaction. Days later, he summoned her alone. That dinner became the hidden trigger for everything she would eventually reveal to the nation. Philip had always believed the monarchy survived through discipline, credibility, and the willingness to endure discomfort when the easier choice was surrender. William was still learning how to carry authority inside his own family, and his instinct was often to protect unity before anything else. That instinct came from loyalty, but the Duke feared it could become dangerous if peace mattered more than principle. William initially resisted the proposal raised that evening. A controversial royal decision was being discussed, and several voices wanted it softened quietly to avoid embarrassment. He argued that changing course would make the family look uncertain. The pressure continued. Finally, he exhaled and said, "If it keeps everyone together, I'll accept it." Philip immediately set down his fork. He looked directly at his grandson and asked, "Fair around what?" Louise remembered the silence that followed. William tried to answer, but his grandfather had already heard enough. The Duke pushed his chair back and left without finishing the meal. Later, she found him alone and visibly furious, though his voice remained controlled. When she approached, Philip told her William's desire to protect everyone could become his greatest weakness if people learned that emotional pressure could change his decisions. Louise defended her cousin. She told Philip that William had been trying to stop a family fracture, not avoid responsibility. Her grandfather did not soften. He answered that leadership sometimes meant allowing people to remain angry, because peace purchased through surrendered judgment was not peace at all. William now remembered that dinner differently. At the time, he had believed compromise proved maturity. Hearing how Philip had interpreted it forced him to confront something much harder. Perhaps loyalty and leadership were not always the same thing. Louise then disclosed, through the private recorded account she later preserved, that Philip wrote the first version of the note within days. He made her repeat one promise aloud. She was never to deliver it simply because William was suffering. She was to deliver it only when suffering began changing how he decided. And when William reached the next paragraph, memory became confrontation, because Philip finally named the weakness he feared most. William had expected advice about duty. What he found instead was a judgment on his character. Philip praised his compassion, then turned that virtue against him. The quality that had allowed William to protect others, the Duke warned, could become precisely what weakened him as king. Louise watched her cousin reach the passage, stop reading, and close the letter. For several seconds, the future monarch appeared unwilling to continue. William knew the accusation reached deeper than temperament. A sovereign, the monarch who serves as Britain's head of state, cannot make every decision according to the emotions of the people closest to him. Philip's warning was simple and brutal. Empathy mattered, but empathy without boundaries could become another form of surrender. Louise understood because she had watched William absorb tensions he had not created, simply because he believed he could carry them. William looked directly at her. "Do you agree with him?" Louise hesitated. He asked again. This time, she did not escape the question. "I think you sometimes call it peace, when you're the only person paying for it." The words hit harder than she intended. William recoiled, then argued that Philip belonged to another generation, one that had never faced the same relentless scrutiny, fractured media pressure, and changing expectations surrounding the monarchy now. Louise refused to retreat. Her voice shook, but she reminded William that Philip was not asking him to copy the past. He was warning him about fear. If the prince became so frightened of causing pain that another person's distress could dictate his judgment, then compassion itself could be used against him. William stared at her, because she had turned his grandfather's private warning into something painfully current. William opened the note again. Philip's next instruction was even harder. When family affection collided with institutional responsibility, the duty to protect the monarchy's constitutional role, rather than personal relationships, he should ask one question: what would he choose if nobody involved shared his blood? Then came the line that silenced him. Loneliness, Philip wrote, was not proof that a leader had chosen wrongly. Sometimes, it was simply the cost of making a decision others refused to make. William stood and moved away from Louise. He gripped the back of a chair, saying nothing. When he finally turned, the anger had disappeared. "How long have you thought I needed this?" Louise gave him the date of a recent private meeting when he had abandoned a firm decision after an emotional appeal. That night, she went home and removed Philip's envelope from hiding. That changed everything, because Louise had not only delivered Philip's judgment, she had made one of her own. The most extraordinary part of Philip's final instruction was not what he wrote, it was who he deliberately excluded. No private secretary controlled the release. No palace committee could accelerate it. No sovereign could order it opened. Philip placed the decision in the hands of a granddaughter, with no expectation of becoming a central power inside the monarchy. In doing so, he created a final safeguard outside royal hierarchy and made Louise unexpectedly responsible for William's defining warning. Louise understood why only after the envelope had been opened. Philip trusted family judgment more than palace process when emotion was involved. A private secretary, the senior official who manages a royal household's work and correspondence, could preserve records perfectly, but the Duke feared personal truth might be softened once too many people became involved. Louise had no claim to power, no need for public influence, and no reason to shape William's future for her own advantage. Louise felt that protection disappear almost immediately. A senior palace aide asked to speak with her privately and wanted to know whether copies of the note existed. She looked directly at him and answered that there was only one original. William now controlled what happened to it. The official closed the folder in front of him and asked nothing more. That silence frightened her more than pressure would have. William noticed the change around Louise and wanted to stop it. He considered keeping her role secret, arguing that she had fulfilled Philip's instruction and deserved to disappear from the consequences. Louise refused. If questions came, she would not let the prince carry responsibility for a choice she had made herself. Her decision irritated him because it sounded painfully familiar. She was accepting discomfort instead of hiding behind peace. William returned to the note and found another instruction. Philip had written that his words could eventually be disclosed publicly, if doing so strengthened trust in the monarchy, but never if William merely needed protection during controversy. The difference mattered. The message could become part of royal history, but using it as a shield would betray everything the Duke was trying to teach him. William now held enormous power and almost no easy choices. Keeping the note private protected the family. Releasing it could deepen public understanding of Philip. Yet either decision could be misunderstood. Then the situation changed again. Charles learned that the letter existed, and when the king discovered there was no equivalent final instruction addressed to him, Philip's silence suddenly became almost as powerful as the words he had left for William. Charles did not react with anger when he was told. That would have been easier. Instead, the king asked to see the envelope, studied Philip's handwriting, and quietly returned it to William. The absence became impossible to ignore. Philip had left a final warning for his grandson about leading the monarchy, yet there was no matching document for his eldest son. Suddenly, the note carried another emotional weight, one nobody in the room knew how to name. Charles had spent a lifetime loving and clashing with his father in equal measure. Their loyalty ran deep, but so did their differences in temperament, expectation, and duty. A reign, the period in which a monarch serves as sovereign, had shaped nearly every argument between them long before Charles inherited the crown. William understood that history, which was why he immediately feared Philip's message could be mistaken for a judgment against his father. Charles sat opposite him with the unfolded note between them. He read several lines without speaking, then removed his glasses and placed them beside the page. "Did Louise know everything that was in this?" he asked. William answered no. The king nodded once. He was not wounded because his son had received guidance. He He was wounded because Philip's final intervention seemed to reach beyond his own reign toward whatever came next. William tried to stop that interpretation. He insisted the note could not become a verdict on Charles or a comparison between father and son. The monarch answered sharply that he did not need protection from a dead man's private judgment. William heard the pain beneath the sentence immediately. His father had spent years measuring himself against Philip's expectations, and now even silence threatened to become another measure. Louise later spoke with Charles privately, according to the documented family account she preserved after the exchange. She told him Philip had never described the envelope as a rejection of his son. The Duke had once told her that every generation inherited a different battle. Charles listened without interrupting. He gave no answer at first, but he did not dismiss her either. Charles then returned to the note and noticed a passage William had overlooked. Philip referred to the reign before yours, and instructed his grandson to study it with generosity rather than resentment. The meaning shifted instantly. The Duke was not telling William to reject Charles. He was telling him to learn from his father's strengths, burdens, and mistakes without turning disagreement into condemnation. William finally understood that the message was larger than conflict. And that realization sent him back to Louise, because Philip's words could only become useful once they stopped belonging to the dead and became a choice for the living. No private secretary attended. No advisor took notes. William and Louise sat alone, and for the first time since the envelope appeared, neither of them discussed procedure. William asked what Philip had been like when he entrusted her with the message. Louise's answer changed everything. The Duke had not sounded frightened for the monarchy. He had sounded frightened for William, the man who might one day become so consumed by preserving the institution that he forgot what kind of man should preserve it. Louise remembered Philip speaking with unusual softness that day. His warning was never only about strategy, succession, or power. It was about character, constitutional service, the duty of a royal to serve the country within established rules, rather than personal desire, meant nothing if responsibility became ego or firmness became cruelty. Philip believed the monarchy remained strongest when the people carrying it could still tell the difference. William asked the question he had avoided from the beginning. What exactly did he say when he gave it to you? Louise hesitated before answering. Her voice dropped. Don't give it to him when he becomes important. Give it to him when importance starts costing him something. The words finally broke through the control she had maintained for years. Louise began crying quietly. Until that moment, she had treated the envelope like a task that had to be completed correctly. Now she remembered the grandfather behind the instruction, and the grief returned without warning. William apologized for becoming defensive when she delivered it. She shook her head and told him she understood. He had been forced to hear criticism from someone he could never answer, challenge, or reconcile with again. William then admitted something Louise had not expected. His deepest fear was not public failure. It was becoming hardened by responsibility, until he no longer recognized the person making the decisions. She answered that Philip's message did not demand coldness. It demanded clarity. Firmness and humanity could exist together, but only if fear of upsetting others stopped controlling the choice. William made his decision. The note would eventually enter the historical record, meaning it would be preserved so future generations could understand Philip's thinking about duty. He would not release it to defend himself in any single controversy. He would release it because its lesson reached beyond one argument. William also made one private promise. Whenever family loyalty clouded a royal decision, he would ask what duty required if affection were removed from the equation. Louise agreed, but warned him that publication would expose them both. Within hours, the announcement was prepared, and Britain was about to discover why Philip's final warning had remained hidden for so long. By morning, the private sentence Philip wrote for William belonged to millions. The reaction was immediate, because the message did not resemble a polished royal tribute. It was severe, intimate, almost uncomfortable. Britain was not hearing the voice of a ceremonial duke. It was hearing a grandfather warning a future king against confusing popularity with duty. Yet the moment that captured the country was not William reading the note. It was Louise leaving Windsor after finally surrendering its secret. William had authorized the release of selected passages together with a written explanation that Louise had safeguarded the original under Philip's direct instruction. The palace statement An official communication issued on behalf of the royal household carefully avoided presenting the note as a political intervention. It described the message as a private reflection on service, judgment, constitutional responsibility, and the demands one generation places upon the next. Louise watched the story explode almost instantly. One national newspaper led with the headline, "Philip's last word to William, duty before peace," placing his handwritten warning beneath an image of her arrival at Windsor. Outside the castle, people gathered near the gates. An elderly veteran placed a small handwritten card among the flowers. It read, "He prepared one more generation." Broadcasters returned to that message again and again. Louise felt the weight of the reaction from home. Sophie sat beside her as commentators began calling her Philip's final trusted messenger. The trusted confidant remained close, while her daughter admitted she had never expected keeping one promise to become a national event. Louise had spent years trying to do exactly what her grandfather asked. Now strangers were debating what her decision said about the future of the crown. William hated seeing that happen. He called Louise personally and told her she owed nobody an interview, an explanation, or access to a family promise that had already been fulfilled. She thanked him, but the prince could hear how overwhelmed she was. Protecting her now became part of the responsibility Philip's note had forced him to examine. Charles experienced something quieter. The king saw the message interpreted not as Philip looking beyond him, but as a father preparing the family beyond any single reign. That distinction softened something inside him. The monarch could finally read the note without hearing rejection in every line. Public attention settled most heavily on Philip's warning that loneliness could accompany correct leadership. Suddenly, the note sounded less like advice and more like confession. The headlines would fade, the crowds would leave, and William would be left with the only question that mattered, whether he would actually live differently because of what Philip had written. In the end, Philip's final gift to William was not a sealed envelope. It was permission to disappoint people when duty demanded it, and permission to remain human while doing so. Louise had spent years protecting those words, believing the importance lay inside the paper. But once the secret was revealed, both cousins understood something deeper. Philip had designed one final lesson involving trust, judgment, courage, and time. The delivery of the message was itself part of the message. William kept the original letter with him rather than sending it immediately into an institutional archive, the official system used to preserve important royal records for history. For a little longer, it remained what Philip had intended it to be, a family object, a final conversation between grandfather and grandson, carried safely through time by the granddaughter he trusted. Louise, meanwhile, stepped back. She asked for no influence, no permanent role, and no recognition beyond the promise she had already fulfilled. William met her again at Windsor after the national reaction had finally begun to settle. He brought the envelope with him, folded the note carefully, and placed it back inside. Then he looked at Louise and said, "You got the timing right." She held his gaze for a moment before answering, "I hoped I had." For the first time since opening the letter, the prince did not look wounded by Philip's criticism. He looked settled by it. Charles reached his own conclusion as well. The king told William that fathers rarely prepare their sons perfectly, and grandfathers are no different. What mattered was whether the next generation could receive guidance without turning it into resentment. William listened differently now. Philip's warning no longer felt like a verdict against anyone. It felt like a standard he could carry forward. Louise finally released the guilt she had carried for years. There was nothing left to hide, interpret, or postpone. Her grandfather had trusted William's ability to lead, but he had trusted her ability to recognize when leadership was becoming lonely. That was the true power of the note. Neither responsibility worked without the other. William did not become stronger because Philip gave him every answer. He became stronger because his grandfather forced him to accept that love, approval, peace, and duty would not always point in the same direction. The monarchy's lesson was equally clear. Continuity does not mean copying the past. It means receiving its principles, understanding their cost, and still having the courage to choose. And there the promise ended. Philip's note had been delivered. Louise's responsibility was complete. Charles had made peace with its meaning. William carried forward not his grandfather's answers, but the courage to make his own. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.